And remember, people said this could not be passed, but yet it was passed through the House, 219 to 212.
Yes.
Do you expect it's going to be passed through the Senate, and if so, by what margin?
It's going to be a slim margin. I think it will pass, but we're going to work really hard in the next 2 or 3 months because they're working on the bill now in committee, and it's in committee. And there's 4 versions of the bill, so it's hard to know which one of the 4 versions they're working on.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's confusing to the public, and it's about 1,300 pages long. And it's stunning in lowering the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act to allow more pollution. I mean, the bill is just stunning in its scope and breadth.
Well, you said 1,300 pages. Let's talk about that for a minute. They added 300 of those pages at 3 a.m., and nobody on the House floor was even able to read that.
That's correct, because they hadn't even been collated. So what happened is when our elected officials in the House voted on the bill, not only hadn't the public seen it because it wasn't collated, but they hadn't read it, and many of the provisions were added, in the midnight hour.
I mean, how does that really speak to where our government's gone at this point, where they can add 300 pages to a 1,300-page bill at 3 in the morning, not even have a hard copy for the congressional party to read? Nobody in Congress can even read this thing, and then they're expected to vote for it.
That's correct. And what it speaks to me is it speaks of lobbyists and backdoor deals and business as usual in the congressional setting, because, see, if they actually let the public read it, the public might have a chance to object, and they didn't want to give the bill any time to be read by the public. So
how do you feel about the media just pushing this through, too? Because, again, the media isn't they're acting like the evil Republicans tried to stonewall this bill. Not that, 300 pages weren't even able to be read.
Oh, the thing is that the media is all for the climate change bill, and it's all supposed to be all wonderful, and they haven't examined cap and trade. But what I noticed was that Senator Dorgan came out on the floor of the Senate and did a wonderful presentation explaining why he couldn't vote for the 400 pages of the cap and trade provisions of the legislation. And other groups are coming back and going to fight back to preserve the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and not lower it so these corporate polluters can pollute more. So, and then the coal industry was handed, in that 300 pages, was handed big lobbying bonuses as well to keep on polluting in their areas. So, I think that the bill should be scrapped. And so that's why when Meredith Smith and I went to, in June, when we went to the U.S. Senate in Washington, D.C., and the U.S. House, and we lobbied all of our senators and 2/3 of the House members, which was all we could do in about a week and a half, being there, going office to office, when we lobbied them to talk about these issues. And I think that more people have to really speak up, call Washington and say, hey, this bill needs to be scrapped, and we don't need to go down the road of paying off Wall Street one more time with another monetary giveaway.
And I believe you handed me a document pertaining to that bill that would create a bunch of different nuclear power plants throughout the country?
Yes, the the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, now, and the Department of Energy under Mr. Chu, who's now Energy Secretary, they're all pushing to get nuclear power back online again and put in new plants. Fission plants, proposed fusion plants, all kinds of plants. And they want to make nuclear power the new entity, and they want to, within the bill, it's going to fund at our expense putting in these types of power plants. And so what happens here is that they don't take into consideration that they're going to use a lot of water, steam coming off the plants, water vapors, the greenhouse gas. Uranium mining is highly toxic, and they're going to be either doing it here, polluting our rivers and streams, or they're going to do it in countries where there's a lot of uranium So you're going to have a lot of people in other countries working in these mines and suffering the consequences of uranium mining, which is not good for miners.
Now, how many plants are we talking about here? Because, again, I thought it was scattered throughout the United States. We're not talking about 1 or 2 or even 5 or 10, are we?
No, we're talking about a minimum of 28 that I've seen so far. And most of them are going to be located in areas which I think are highly dangerous, and that's areas where there's hurricanes, severe weather events, and in different areas where when they store the radioactive waste on site, it could escape during a hurricane and during different types of events. They have no place to store the radioactive waste that these plants are going to produce. So right now, there's a lot of drawbacks, and it's expensive to even, I think it costs about $2 billion a year just to monitor the waste in these plants that we have now.
It is kind of mind-blowing. 28 new nuclear power plants. Where is all this waste supposed to go, and why the rush to get into nuclear power, and what communities are supposed to make the sacrifice for this type of behavior? It's the InfoWarrior with Jason Bermas, back after this with Rosalind Peterson, Infowars.com, and PrisonPlanet.tv.
Gotta make a plan, gotta do what's right. Can't run around in circles if you wanna build a life. But I don't wanna make a plan for a day far away. While I'm young and while I'm able, all I wanna do is...
We are back. It's the InfoWarrior with Jason Bermas, joined by CaliforniaSkywatch.com's own Rosalind Peterson. And Rosalind, one of the things that really interests me about this whole subject matter is its connection to NASA. Can we talk about that for a moment?
You mean the jets?
Not the cap and trade stuff, but
okay.
Just the geoengineering topic in general.
Well, NASA and the U.S. Air Force have really joined together for a lot of projects. So NASA has become militarized, especially for many of the satellites that go up, and many of its projects are more and more becoming military projects. So what happens here is that they have moved together in order to do a lot of these atmospheric heating and testing programs. They've moved together to do a lot of projects, warfare projects, in conjunction with militarized satellites, those kind of projects. So NASA is becoming less and less of an agency that's just for public and space exploration, although that's a large part of what they do. But they're becoming more and more part of as a handmaiden for the military projects. And so there's extra military money that goes into the funding for NASA now because of this connection between the two of them.
And what kind of documentation have you gotten that provides this information?
Well, if you go look at the CRES program, CRRES program, if you look at some of the documents on my website, if you go to agriculturedefensecoalition.org, look in the search engine, you can type in CRRES and come up with a whole lot of projects that are joint NASA and U.S. Air Force projects. And you begin to see NASA involved in militarized satellites and things like that. So less and less are they just, in other words, a public agency which had a different mission. I think their mission has really changed.
Well, why do you think it's changed so much? I mean, obviously, NASA was out there, they're putting us on the moon, it's the space program, even the Challenger in the 80s was hugely promoted, and then they kind of fell into the background. And it seems to me as they fell into the background, they're more apt to take on these kind of projects that the public knows very little about. Well, yes, and see, they're involved in spy satellites, and there's a lot of talking about using space-based weapon systems. So as NASA becomes more involved with the military, then they get into these types of projects as part of a military project. And the funding goes to NASA, and then it goes off to military projects as well, or they fund research in those areas for the military. So you have to kind of track what NASA's doing and associate it somewhat with the military. And I think part of the being on the moon and other things is part of our usage, going to be our usage usage of space for warfare weapons. I think that's the next thing that's going to come. It does seem like this is going to be, weaponized. It's what the military does. I kind of want to get your take on Bill Gates announcing that he had these machines that could knock out hurricanes, and he's intending to put them, I think it's over on the Pacific coast, and that he wants to tax the residents for him, basically stopping bad weather.
I didn't know about the West Coast. You mean
maybe it's not Pacific. I forget which ocean it's in. I can't remember.
Well, there was some talk about the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic, and he was going to put these machines out so that they could churn up the water and cool it down. In other words, bring up cooler water and then have it replace the warmer surface water when a hurricane was on its way. And it was talking about modifying hurricanes. I do know about that project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about.
And that was some patents about that, but that was for controlling and redirecting or stopping hurricanes.